Thank you very much for coming to this final session. Well, third session, the final one at the library. We have a fourth one later this evening. If you did not get a chance to talk to the speakers that you wanted to, the format tonight, we have a very casual format. Jennifer Angel will be moderating the evening session today at the Brewery Market at 6 p.m. The format of that is going to be very casual conversations reflecting on the day, both from the speaker's side and the audience. There will be mics going around, so please show up and ask the burning questions that you wanted to ask today and you didn't have time for it. Without further ado, I'd like to start the session on future cities. I was very lucky to be selected as one of the jury members to the first year of the Future Cities, the Smart Cities Challenge that the federal government is hosting for the next 10 years. This year is the first year. When I went into it, I thought, great, we're going to talk about all these smart solutions that are going to save us. Our cities are going to be so much better by the virtue of just applying technology to it. But through the process of sitting around with a very diverse group of people around the table, other jury members, Matthew, who will be speaking today, being one of them, learning that future cities is not about the technology alone. That's only one of the many dimensions of future cities. We are very lucky today to be talking to several people locally, Matt Hebb and Jesse Rodgers, and from Toronto, Boston, and Amsterdam, about different aspects of future cities. What does it take for us to go from where we are today to a city that evolves into something better? Through our conversation over the past couple of days with the speakers in Halifax, at Peggy's Cove, around the table, having lobster dinner at TJ's house, TJ's parents' house, we learned that the way we have to think about future cities is, what are the future cities, who are they intended for? Are they intended for the city politicians to hold up a sign and say, look, we apply AI to our processing, the application management, or does it mean that the kid that is walking to school feels safer because of the data that was collected through the placemaking process? So with that, I'd like to start the conversation by inviting Matt Hebb to come forward for a presentation. Matt is the chair of Halifax Partnership Board of Directors, and he's also the Associate VP of the Governance Relations and Economic Development with Dalhousie University. Matt was one of the most influential leaders in Halifax that helped secure the supercluster funding from the federal government, one of the only 5 across the country. So Matt, if you would, where's Matt? Oh, right there. Keep looking around.
Well, hi. How's everybody doing? I've just come here from the travel doctor, and I had like 4, 5, 6 needles. So if I suddenly just pass out cold, that's probably why. It's a real treat to be part of this conference. I've been able to sit in for the last for that last session, and it's an amazing dialogue, and I think such an exciting time in Halifax to be thinking about our future and the opportunities that are opening up before us. All I'd like to do is just sort of quickly share with you some thoughts, just reflecting on my own experiences in the last little while. As Kourosh said, I'm the chair of the Halifax Partnership, which is Halifax's economic development agency. I'm also the associate VP for Government Relations and Economic Government Relations and Economic Development at Dalhousie. And I've been seconded, actually, to be the CEO, the interim CEO for the Ocean Supercluster for the last 8 months. So that's why I can't keep track of what my job is. But what's fascinating to me is how deeply the most interesting things that I have encountered in all 3 of those spaces have been rooted and grounded in Halifax, in the momentum and the dynamism of this city. And so what I'd like to reflect on today is as a future cities session for Halifax is where I believe and hope that the city can go. I'm not sure which there we go. So I'm just going to, I'll throw out, this will be the sort of the point I try to make very, very briefly, that I think the future Halifax needs to be a place that is conducive to innovation and entrepreneurship and that fosters a global perspective. And I think that means being a city that's attractive to young, innovative ventures that are focused on challenges and opportunities around the world. And the reason why I think this is an interesting way to look at the future of the city is beyond the immediate economic impact that young firms can have. I believe that when we look at places where we see these kinds of ventures thriving, we tend also to find stakeholder communities, social networks, qualities of place that are or that can become drivers of things like meaningful employment, economic dynamism, social and environmental impact, inclusion, and other kinds of goals that I think are the sorts of values that we would really want in the city that we try to build for the future. So as I've reflected on the things that we've been working on, whether it's the supercluster or some of the things we've been involved in through DAL or through the partnership, there's sort of three things that kind of bubble up for me that I thought were relevant to reflect on for today, and that's the importance of density, connectivity, and placemaking. So density just in the sense of having enough critical mass of things like talent, infrastructure, commercial activity, immigration to create an economic center of gravity, a motor that can drive other things. Connectivity, then, more thinking of that as the means by which different sectors or communities of interest or value chains are visible to each other and able to intersect with each other. And then placemaking, I think of as the variety of ways in which we ground those things in the place that we are, and how we embrace our unique and distinct comparative advantages that come from our place. And I think all three of these things are vitally important, and I think that they all really influence each other. So as I think about the conversation today, and I think about placemaking, I think that what placemaking, for me, needs to do is it needs to make density and connectivity possible. And while I think it's always a challenge, and we always think about the challenges associated with building economic density, attracting investment, attracting companies, growing employment, those kinds of things, I actually think that improving connectivity is where some of the most interesting opportunities are going to come from for us. And among other things, I think that focus on trying to build a place that improves connectivity means a focus on reducing barriers and frictions between people. I think it means making the things that we do, our activities and our accomplishments, more visible to each other. And I think we have these weird cultural ways, and maybe it's like this everywhere, but it's certainly like that here, where we have a lot of communities that are kind of invisible to each other. So I also think it's about linking diverse and disparate communities. So my experience with the ocean supercluster has been interesting because these kinds of goals, these kinds of connectivity goals have really driven the way that we've tried to approach the ocean supercluster. And what the ocean supercluster does in a nutshell is it aims to foster collaboration and co-investment across sectors and across different value chains such that entities and organizations can come together and tackle problems that are otherwise too big, too costly, too risky for them to take on by themselves as an individual firm or an individual sector. And so the supercluster is very much focused on how do we reduce friction and barriers that would stand in the way of those kinds of meaningful collaborations. And the way that we do that, or the way that I think about that more than anything else, is as an exercise in creating shared purpose or common purpose. And so I think that this is what we need to make central to placemaking for me, is how do we create a place that fosters and is animated by shared purposes. And this is a little bit sort of, heading down the road towards, I guess, a collective impact sort of way of thinking about these things. And I think it's a very rich territory for us to think about playing in because it allows for really transformative and dynamic new ideas to come forward. And I would argue that the ocean supercluster is an example of that. But it can be tricky territory as well because to be successful here, I think we all have to be comfortable operating in a bit of an unowned space that's in between all of the different stakeholder groups. It doesn't work if government tries to put their hands all around it and say, look, it comes down to what we're prepared to fund or the rules we're prepared to pass. It doesn't work if the universities say, look, we're going to do it all on campus and we'll have our own incubators and our own accelerators and our own alumni funds. It works best when stakeholders from across the economy and across society are able to put forward their own best value, but also really work to bring out the best in others. And so I think that this is this sort of unowned space that we need to operate in as we think about building the future of Halifax. And I thought I would just quickly finish, because I'm actually really interested to hear what everybody else has to say about this, by reflecting on sort of just two examples of things that I think are starting to create this sense of shared purpose and becoming a really interesting platform for us to think about the future of Halifax. And so the first one of these is this kind of emerging Halifax Innovation District. And this is a very imperfect map. I've kind of slapped it together with a very little regard for geography or accuracy even. It's an unbounded space, but what I want to sort of convey more than anything is just there is a real density that falls into a fairly tight geographical pattern of real important drivers of innovation, whether it's the universities, the hospitals. This room that we stand in is essentially its living room. In the very, very heart of it. And just behind me and to the right, there's been a whole bunch of new development around Dalhousie's engineering and architecture campuses. Right down the road, you're going to hear about a very exciting development that my colleague Jesse Rodgers is leading. It sweeps down to the many new developments, including Argyle, that was rightly recognized for the exciting development that it is, and across the harbor to the new Center for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship, which is a reclaimed, abandoned Coast Guard site that will now be, a distinctive hub for ocean technology and innovation. The waterfront campus, the Ivany campus of the Nova Scotia Community College. So you've got this incredible density of innovative assets. But in addition to that, we've also got these incredible amenities that make our downtown livable, desirable, attractive. Great places to eat, have a drink, meet friends, walk in a park, live. And this is really important because as much as sort of suburban models of innovation will no doubt continue to be important, where you need big campuses and science tech parks and so on, it's also really evident that around the world, these urban innovation contexts are also really significant. And I think for mid-sized cities like Halifax, they're actually becoming a really important economic comparative advantage compared to big, costly urban centers, whether it's the Valley or Boston or Toronto or Vancouver. The second thing and the last thing, and then I'm going to sit down and eagerly listen to everybody else, is just to reflect on Halifax's ocean advantage. And I could easily go on for the next 3 days about this, so I won't. I'll just get a smattering of the things that we have present here that make Halifax, I think, one of the top cities in the world for ocean innovation and impact at global scale. Within the federal government, not only do we have Canada's East Coast Navy, the largest concentration of military assets anywhere in Canada. We've got the Bedford Institute of Oceanography, the largest federal civilian research entity. We've got the NRC. We've got Dalhousie University and its many ocean labs, the Nova Scotia Community College. We've got over 50 world-class ocean tech SMEs that are exporting around the world. We've got the Irving shipyard that is about to embark on some $60 billion worth of activity over the next 25 years to build the next fleet of Arctic offshore patrol vessels as well as the surface combatant. So this is an enormous collection of ocean-related assets. We've got the Port of Halifax, which is the most significant port on the eastern seaboard, north of New York City. We've got the Waterfront Development Corporation, now Develop Nova Scotia, but I still think of mostly the waterfront. That incredible public space that can help to animate all of this. So these are incredible things, two incredible things that I think when you pull them together, this enormous ocean advantage that we have as a city, now pairing up with an incredible emerging context for innovation and entrepreneurship. And I really believe that the future of Halifax will be as a city where the world can come to grow and create the most incredible, impactful, ocean-related ventures in the world. And that will have an enormous impact, I think, in the future good for the planet and an enormous impact on our region and our country. So I will pause there. I look forward to the rest of the conversation. And are you going to take? Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. I'd like to invite Jess to come forward. I met Jess a couple of years ago as he was scouting for sites to expand Volta Labs. He's the CEO of Volta Labs. He's been in the startup business for the past 15 years. He may not know this himself, but he's a very good advocate for placemaking. Maybe placemaking that we don't necessarily talk about, but we should be talking about, which is placemaking for the people that are actually doing the work in our city. So I'd like to invite Jesse to come forward. Thank you.
So I'm going to try to upstage Matt here by staying to my allotted time. But I'll try, yeah. So I'm sure everyone in here is somewhat familiar with innovation hubs or incubators or those type of spaces. They exist pretty much in every city now. I think the trick is try to find a city where one doesn't exist. And Volta is generally like that. So my history is I was in Waterloo, a suburban area of about 500,000, 600,000 people now, and multiple cities, Waterloo region, not Waterloo City. There's Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, to say everything correctly. And this type of thing existed in that region and was used to, now there's $1 billion in building contracts that are going out, and they're actually building a city inside of these multiple little towns. And over the next generation, you're going to see a massive transformation in that region. But a lot of it came around these innovation spaces and the innovation hubs. So we looked at what we could do and take something that had started with Volta as being this small little space where founders had come together and founders of tech companies to kind of share their experience, get to know each other. And can we take some of what happened in Waterloo and bring that to Halifax, a city that does exist. There is a downtown here. It's an amazing downtown. But bring that economy, that innovation ecosystem, and those pieces to downtown Halifax, and give people the positive stories that come along with that and the excitement of the companies that do that, that they live in this space. So enter Volta. We just opened up 6,000 or 60,000 square feet just down the street in the Maritime Center. Not the prettiest building in town, but the biggest next to the Nova Center, I believe now. And we're making the best of it by getting it in the lobby level. And when we look at this, we look at innovation not being something that's just about high-tech companies. We're talking about leveraging a growth mindset and adopting methodologies that create opportunities for people. And that's what we look at, what we want to build in our environment, in our space, are people that focus on that. And when we talk about growth mindset, so what I looked at around Waterloo, and I built a creative destruction lab in Toronto as well. Toronto's a completely different beast, and that experience can influence but does not give me a lot of examples that are relevant to a community not like Toronto. And Toronto likes to say it's unique anyway, so it can have it. So I love Toronto. But when we look at the growth mindset, we look at Canada outside of cities like Toronto, where growth has been happening, and people are very excited about that. They don't see that same growth. They don't know of the opportunities. They kind of feel constrained by what's around them. They feel a scarcity, and they're worried about change, and they're worried about what's going to happen next. In Toronto, you kind of get that flip. In Canada, and there's just growth has been happening every time. There's opportunity. You're stuck on the highway. There's all kinds of stuff like that happening. But the really amazing thing that happened in Waterloo, and what had shifted in Waterloo in the time that I was there as a student, and then lived there with my family, and I was there for over 20 years, people started to develop a different perspective of what was going on around the environment. They were no longer afraid of change, and they were embracing it, and they were embracing the opportunities that came along with that. And what really changed is that understanding that things are going to change. There's resilience. You can develop things. You can understand it. Everyone had a role to play in it. People weren't going to be excluded. in the community. And of course, there's still that feeling in the community, but there's a lot of work being done to make it an inclusive environment where people feel they have an opportunity to grow and be a part of that. And that's what these environments are for. So growth mindset is pretty simple. I mean, concept in terms of you can get smarter and you can learn and you can do that. You can get higher achievement through spending more time and working harder on things. There's actually science to back a lot of that, where they looked at two twins. It was a recent article. I think it was in Forbes, something like that. But they looked at twins. One of them became an Olympic athlete. The other one did not. They just assumed the one that did not would have the same muscle tissue that gives that high performance athlete the advantage, and they didn't. Identical twins, you should see it in both. And that one that became that athlete developed that through hard work. They weren't the naturally gifted athlete you might identify at 8 years old, but they worked at it and they became that. And I think our brain is a muscle, and our brain needs to work on that as well. And through these environments, through these spaces, that's what we want to promote. So Volta's mission, we want to enhance the entrepreneur and innovation ecosystem in Atlantic Canada. Pretty simple. Looks good on a strategy document. Works for our website. What does it mean? There's three really important things. And a couple years ago, when I started at Volta, I came just over two and a half years ago. We wanted to focus on three things that are important to us, not things we necessarily will do, but need to be in our environment. The foster vibrant and growing base of technology companies that are globally minded and locally based. That's definitely something we should be focused on, but we can't just do on our own. It takes an ecosystem. We went to do that. Our new space now is 33 companies. When I started at Volta, only 33 companies had been in Volta over the 3 years before that. That's an increase, and we want to get up to around 50 companies in our environment and grow that piece here. Support educational institutions as they develop this, is helping them with their programs, getting access to what's going on around Volta, helping with things like the Idea Hub, getting more into the ecosystem in the community, focus on K-12 education. How can we help students understand the opportunities that are here in Nova Scotia and broadly in Atlantic Canada? And then the Innovation District. And again, that definitely takes a huge team of people in different organizations to participate in doing that and understand that we want that environment that exists and most people want in terms of I'm going to work here and live here and everything's kind of within walking distance and I don't have to worry about cars and that type of thing. And that density in terms of creativity helps just in terms, has those collisions occur that you just can't plan. You're not going to book, you're not going to fill your calendar full of these things, but I'm going to be sitting at a table and I'm going to run into somebody who's working on something amazing. I have an example of that, and when I bring folks from here to Waterloo, you just sit in Communitech and don't plan out your day, and you end up with a really full day talking to people that have done crazy stuff and are working on crazy stuff. You don't plan it, it just happens. And that's a success that exists in the Waterloo region that we've already seen, and Volta's only been, grand opening was about a month ago, and it's happening already in our space. It's kind of a natural occurrence when you get the people in the environment. So where we are is down, again, just to give you the illustration, they're expanding the front of the building to come out to the street, which is going to make it a little more modern looking, a little cleaner, and make it more accessible to the public. A really ambitious kind of idea for a building that you wouldn't think necessarily be open to investment. And the owners have done this. There'll be a nice restaurant in there, and we're going to take up a big chunk of that lobby when it's done. Our space is something you'd see just about in any city, not really unique in modern design, beautiful steel case furniture throughout. They were a great partner through that kind of helped make that something that was cost effective for us. And we host events. Our bottom right corner there was one of the first events we had before we were officially open in our lobby. We have 3 floors. The first floor is a public space with rooms that people can book and use for meetings. Second floor are 1 to 5 person companies, and on the other wing we have corporate innovation. ALC was one of the first, Atlantic Lottery Corp was one of the first in there. They have innovation teams that work on things from new products to getting things out in the public. Pretty astonishing thing. The province of Nova Scotia just went in there. We have a few more that are going to be announced soon that'll be in that space. And then the second floor is everything from 10 to 45 person companies. On this side here, there's 2 companies that are around 40 people each. And we use that, then those companies mentor down. In terms of the companies that are large, their executive teams and others can mentor the teams that are across the hall. Those teams can mentor the teams that are below them. as they're just kind of ahead of each other, and we create that ecosystem and that ownership and that connection between people that are in different phases of developing companies. But over the long term, that creates a great group of peers. Where we see the opportunity in Halifax, we talk about oceans, it is an absolutely amazing thing, but we look at it a little broader, talk about the deskless workforce. We look at a lot of the companies in Volta, most of them are focused on this, on products that help people that don't have desks. This is actually a very large market. It's 2.7 billion people. It's 80% of the workforce that don't have desks. It's not something that the tech world has been really focused on. They like to sell you SaaS software that you use at your desk. But in Halifax and in Atlantic Canada as a whole, the majority of the workforce is deskless. And that creates a great opportunity because it's very accessible, lots of expertise, and we find, again, the companies tend to be focused on that and they're being successful in that space. So I do think that that's something unique to Atlantic Canada, where we just have more on that side of the table, and that's what we focus on. We're really excited by what's going on in Halifax, and I think in Atlantic Canada as a whole, the momentum's building. It's a really exciting time to be here. It kind of feels a lot like Southern Ontario 10, 15 years ago, where you just kind of see things just day after day. There's something to be excited about. And that's kind of the story of Halifax. If you have any questions or anything you want to email me, there's my contact information.
Thank you very much, Jesse. It's great to have you at the Planning and Design conference. We hope to see you in the future conferences as well. And you should invite us to your conferences too to talk about placemaking. Our next speaker is Matthew Claudel. He is a researcher. I want to get this right. He's a designer, researcher, and writer. He's co-authored 2 books. He sits on the jury for Smart Cities Challenge with the federal government. He teaches at MIT. He's also doing his PhD at MIT. His list of credentials are very long. I do encourage you to have a look at the website. We are hoping that he would come. He's loving Halifax, so we are hoping that he would keep coming back here to inspire us. He's the head of civic innovation with MIT Design X. And Matthew, please take it on. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. So one of the funny things about being affiliated with MIT is people expect you to know about technology, and that is not the case here. So we're... Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my ideas of civic innovation, what it means.
Please on the mic.
Okay.
Recording mic.
All right. Cool. So civic innovation and what it means to do technology and entrepreneurship for cities. So all of us are here today. Cool. Thank you. So all of us are here today because we know that cities are the front line for a lot of humanity's biggest challenges. Cities are where abstract things like environmental sustainability are connecting to light switches. They're where behavior matters. And this is where we need innovation. This is where we should be thinking about how technology can help us do things better. It's also true that the planet is urbanizing. The human population is over half in cities right now, and cities are creating a disproportionate share of the world's economic activity. So these are all statistics you've heard if you're here. I gather that you've heard these kind of overall trends, but the zeitgeist right now is proclaiming that cities are the biggest opportunity and the biggest market on planet Earth. So it's no surprise that there's more and more technology for cities. There's more and more entrepreneurship for cities. Last year, venture capital poured $44 billion into specifically city technologies. So money is flooding in here. So if you ask, what are those city technologies? This is just a snapshot of some of those that have been funded recently. And in my mind, city technologies are the physical products or the digital infrastructures or the place-based services that are using technology in urban space and in the public right-of-way. So these are all familiar names, and you've probably used a lot of these products and services. So all of this is nothing new, right? And I see a problem here. which is that not everyone is benefiting from city technology. A recent study showed that over 20% of the increase in economic segregation since 1990 is a direct result of technological innovation. It's true that more innovative cities have greater inequality. This is a photo from downtown Boston. It's right near City Hall. And Boston is often pointed to as one of the most innovative cities in the United States. So what I see is that a lot of these companies are clashing with city governments. They have this ethos of disruption. And as they're rushing to solve a very specific problem, they're creating a whole host of externalities. They're grabbing a very small and lucrative market, but they're creating some really big problems. They're seeing more and more lawsuits, actually, and they're seeing more and more alienated customers. So it's increasingly clear that business as usual doesn't work for cities. And government as usual doesn't know how to deal with technology. And I see these two fundamentally incompatible logics. On the one hand, you have this ethos of disruption, aiming for the highest margins, the most users, the biggest impact, moving fast, even if that means leaving some people behind. And on the other hand, you have this ethos of regulation. This is thinking about under-resourced populations. It's thinking about the outliers and those people who are not in the center of the bell curve. It's about moving through bureaucracy, even if that means moving slowly. One is a logic of tools, and the other is a logic of deliberation. So I'm going to show some examples of how this tension is playing out in Boston. The first is Amazon free same-day delivery. This was an extraordinary achievement of data-driven logistics and retail. It rolled out in many cities across the United States, and it was really an incredible service. But it was also not uniformly available. This is a map of which neighborhoods in Boston had access to that service, or if you see right in the middle of the map, which specific neighborhood did not have access to that service. And interestingly, Roxbury is one of the lowest income neighborhoods in Boston. So there's a hole right in the middle of the map. And this quickly sparked a battle. There was an expose in Bloomberg Business Review, and Amazon defended their decision. They said, no, this is just the data, right? This is a calculation of the member density of Prime. This is a calculation of the proximity to warehouse facilities. In other words, this was really good business logic to leave out Roxbury. But how could that be the right decision here? I mean, this kind of neighborhood arguably needs better access to quick and inexpensive delivery, because those are the kinds of neighborhoods that chain stores are systematically avoiding. Right? And so that was the kind of government logic that the mayor used to put pressure on Amazon. And finally, Amazon relented. They said, okay, we'll ship to Roxbury. And soon after, the mayors of New York and Chicago demanded that they also get ubiquitous access in their cities. So how should city tech be deployed? Right? This is a really interesting question. Who should benefit from this? And will there always be this battle between cities and governments? Another more recent example is Bird. These are dockless scooters. You may have heard of these. These birds landed in Cambridge over the summer. Right now, dockless mobility solutions are a really hot market in tech and entrepreneurship. You see dockless bikes, you see these electric scooters. It's a super hot market, and it's getting a lot of VC funding. Bird knew that, and so they took an aggressive launch strategy in Cambridge. They thought, we've got to move fast, we've got to capture users. This is a winner-take-all situation. And so this is a screenshot. Almost overnight, Bird dumped its scooters on Cambridge streets. My colleagues and I in City Hall were following this whole deployment on the app to see where these scooters were going to go. And interestingly, Bird didn't want to engage with the city of Boston. They thought, we'll go into Cambridge, where there's MIT, there's these kind of nerds and techies. We're going to capture that market, and then we're going to take on a stronger city government like Boston. As you can imagine, it was illegal to dump those scooters on the sidewalk, because sidewalks are in the public right-of-way, right? Safety matters and accessibility matters. And so within weeks, the Cambridge city government tried to shut them down. So once again, this is where it gets fun. We were following on the app, where are the scooters going to go now that Cambridge is trying to shut them down? And we found them. They're all right here in the Department of Public Works. They're just sitting there and losing battery. So this is a legal battle, right? And it hasn't been resolved. There's no good solution here. It's also a design battle. I come from a design background, and for me, I kind of think, who are these things made for, right? And look at it. That thing is made for me. It's made for someone who's fit and who's young and who's able and who can pay for it, right? So on the one hand, is this a fast and sustainable mobility solution? On the other hand, is this an eyesore? Is it unsafe? Is it made for a prototypical and wealthy user? The final example I'll show is spatial data itself. This is Google Maps. You've all used it, I'm sure. It's a really useful tool to navigate unknown environments. It's also a really useful tool for small businesses to quite literally get on the map. It's much more effective to reach customers than hanging a sign outside. And I use this all the time. But I started noticing that when you open up a map, it only shows you a few particular places, depending on how you zoom. And so I took a screenshot of the neighborhood around MIT because I wanted to know, what does Google think is important to me, right? So here you can see MIT Museum, because I'm kind of a nerd. Life Alive is a place where you can get kind of like vegan bowls. And of course, Cambridge Brewing Company and the Middle East nightclub, because I'm a young male, and that's all I can think about is beer and parties. So this is funny. And it's interesting because these are all places I've been, actually. And so Google launched a new feature on top of Maps because they thought, oh, we're going to help people find places they haven't been. It's about exploration. So this is called For You. And the idea is to link your online behavior, all of the profile that you've built, your economic activity and your patterns of searching, with your offline behavior, which is your suggestions of where to go and how to get there. And Google's incentive, really logically, is to give you the kinds of recommendations you're likely to enjoy. But the result is that the hottest destinations are only going to get hotter. And that, to me, doesn't really look like an economic development strategy, especially for the smaller businesses at the margins. Not to mention that the same kinds of people are getting the same kinds of recommendation. So the city is becoming almost like an echo chamber. And people are separated along these advertising profile lines. So all in all, these are examples of the business logic, business as usual, applied to the complexity of cities. These city solutions are being shipped out almost like they're consumer technology. And they're designed for prototypical users. They're designed to be scalable. They're designed with global intent. They're designed to be efficient and lucrative. And governments don't know what to do. They genuinely don't. They don't know, are we supposed to embrace these? Are we supposed to regulate? Can we even regulate? And we also don't know if we can solve this all on our own. And in between is us. We are users. And it seems like we don't have agency on either side. It seems like cities and technology are just both happening to us. And I believe from all these examples that how we design and deploy this technology matters. And that it's only going to matter more and more and more in the long run. Because these cities are getting ripped apart. I showed those inequality statistics earlier on. We live in a time of extreme inequality, and we can't wait for these slow transformations in government or in business. And we can't struggle to reconcile those logics. They're fundamentally incompatible. So what I want to argue is that cities need a new logic. We need a new way of thinking about what entrepreneurship means. We need a new way of thinking about technology. So I think we've been really looking in a narrow way at all these questions. I think we've been really lazy with city technology. I think we've seen dozens of food delivery startups in the past year. There's nothing less innovative than a food delivery startup in 2018. I mean, it's crazy. So the answer isn't to do more innovative tech and do it better and find these new holes in the marketplace. The answer is to find a new way of doing technology altogether. We need to innovate with cities and with residents. We need to experiment. We need to do this in a joyful way that brings everyone to the table. So there are some ventures that believe this can happen. They're working to flip the narrative of entrepreneurship. They're designing collaboratively, and they're prototyping, and they're deploying for equity. And they know that when it comes to cities, social impact isn't a matter of altruism. It isn't a matter of corporate social responsibility. It's a matter of long-term success for those ventures and for the cities that play host to them. So it's with this idea that we started a new program at MIT called DesignX. And This is a program that deals with creating this new narrative of entrepreneurship and of design for cities. So we invite teams to pitch and develop their technology through prototyping. This is open to students and faculty and researchers, and we offer them funding. We offer them a network of mentors. We offer them an academic curriculum that they actually get credit for, so they can do their thesis as a venture. And we're helping people use design not only to develop technologies and ideas, but actually to design the venture itself. And so far, these students and these technologies that are going through the program, they're proving the hypothesis. They're proving that this kind of civic form of entrepreneurship is possible. And I'm going to show you a couple of them. So this is a company called BioBot. It began as a collaboration between a microbiologist and an urban planner. Strange pairing there. But they thought, what if we created a smart sewer sensor? And so they started working with the city of Cambridge. And at first they thought, we're going to create a whole panel of public health data. This robot goes down, it samples sewer water, and it can actually process the sewer water on site. But very quickly, in collaboration with the city, they realized the much more urgent case to be focused on is the opioid crisis, which in the United States is the leading cause of injury death. So with high quality and real-time data that, crucially, the cities own in partnership with public health institutions, they can target sensitive and effective support. So they can combat stigma and they can get in neighborhoods that need it the most. An interesting point here is that they're creating a new class of data. Right now there is no data for sewer, there's no legal class for data from sewer water because it simply hasn't existed before. There's laws about who owns the data from garbage, for example, who can go through your garbage. There's no class of data on sewers, and BioBot is developing that in partnership with legal professionals and with mayors and with residents. Another company is called Nesterly. These guys are helping people age in place while also fighting the rising cost of housing. So especially in Boston, but everywhere, the over 60 population is growing, and oftentimes empty nesters have an empty bedroom, and they need help around the house. So Nesterly is creating an intergenerational home sharing platform that uses chores to cover part of the rent and offers a new way for students to live nearby where they're going to school. The technology itself here is nothing new. There's platforms like Airbnb and Angie's List and Zillow, but the way they've done it is new. So they've worked, worked in partnership with the Boston Housing Innovation Lab, and they're really solving a problem that's integral to the city of Boston. They did an initial pilot of 8 households this past fall, and that was so successful that they're now rolling out all across Boston. Finally, a company called Spaces is filling vacant storefronts with temporary artist studios. The idea here being that the trend is that downtown retail is hollowing out with all the integration of online shopping. And at the same time, artists are getting forced out of studios because they're getting converted to trendy lofts or office spaces. So Spaces is counteracting both of those trends and working directly with landlords and with artists. The result is that they're bringing vitality to streetscapes. This is an event they did, I'm forgetting the name of the organization, but it was a kind of maker fair in their space. And I think there's 2 interesting points here, which is that Spaces was working closely with the mayor's office and with the fire department to create a new zoning class or a new permission structure, a certificate of occupancy so that you can actually be making in formerly retail spaces. This sounds really boring and bureaucratic, but I think it's a really interesting idea, and it's going to open the door for a lot of pop-up ventures in the future. The second interesting point here is where they chose to locate. So they weren't downtown, they weren't in the innovation district, they weren't near MIT and the tech clusters. They're actually in Roslindale, which is in the south part of Boston, and it's a part of Boston I had never been to before they opened this space. So in summary, all these companies, all these ventures are working with residents and city governments, and they're co-creating technology, and they're diffusing the value that that technology creates. They're also generating new policy and new regulation in a collaborative way. So I want to bet on these technologies because they're designed with the fabric of community. So they're not going to see those lawsuits, and they're not going to see those issues arise that happen when you helicopter in technology. I also quickly want to show a project I'm working on with the mayor's office, and it's really the other side of the coin here. And the core idea was that we learned from all these companies. We know that civic innovation depends on public prototyping. We know that you have to get out of the lab and you have to get out of the university in order for this stuff to matter. But at the same time, you don't want just anyone pulling up manhole covers and shoving their robots in the sewers, right? So we need a program that supports safe and legal and productive experiments with city technology. So this is a new initiative. It's in partnership with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics in Boston, and it's called Beta Blocks. So the idea is that we're doing these experiments with technology at the block scale. There's 3 pieces. The first is that neighborhoods start in a fun sort of block party atmosphere, and they write a community mission statement. They're deciding on the challenges that are important to them. They're deciding on how they see their neighborhood being better in the future. And they're writing a sort of contract for what technology can and cannot do in their neighborhood. We're also keeping a catalog of technologies. And by the way, this is both high and low tech. This is the drones, and this is also park benches. And we're working with local universities to take those mission statements and generate new technology through a design studio, through programs like DesignX. And it's all based on an overall criteria, a city-wide criteria for city technology, but also a neighborhood-level criteria for what they want those technologies and use patterns to look like. So if an idea matches with a particular technology, we can do an experiment. And I also want to mention experiment is a really politically loaded word, and I'm happy to get into that. But this is somewhere between a prototype and a real-life Kickstarter video and a block party, right? It happens in public space and with residents. But we're also collecting data. We're collecting quantitative data on the performance of things and on the patterns of use around them. For example, where people leave a scooter on the sidewalk, how many scooters gets used at what time of day. But also qualitative feedback, how residents feel about that stuff, what their ideas are for how it could be better. So this provides valuable information to the technologists who can iterate and make a better version of what they do. And it provides valuable information to city governments that can generate new forms of policy from those patterns of use. And it keeps residents at the center of this entire process. And it gives them the tools to design and have their fingerprint on technology. So Beta Blocks becomes an interface with civic futures. And the starting point is the everyday life of residents. We're not doing focus groups. We're not bringing people out of their daily life. We're getting in there, and we're creating a tool that anyone can use, that anyone can find value in. We're actually partnering with the branch libraries in Boston to do this. So they're going to play host to some of those design workshops and the space of experimentation. So this is really a resource for people who don't ordinarily see themselves as part of the conversation in future cities and technology. So over time, everyone starts becoming more fluent with this. Everyone has their fingerprint on it. And once again, I think that that will create a more robust form of city technology. It's a new way of doing entrepreneurship. So in conclusion, I think that we're at a historic turning point. We're at this moment when technology is becoming the infrastructure of our daily lives. And we have an opportunity, and it's a fast shrinking window, to decide what we want that infrastructure to look like, how it will work, who it will be available to. And I think we need a revolution in how we innovate for cities. We need a revolution in how we do entrepreneurship. We need to redefine the art of city building. I want to riff on that. We need to think in political, economic, and cultural dimensions about that phrase. We need to think about the art of recapturing the design of technology. We need to think about the art of place-based economic modes. We need to think about the art of experimentation in local governance, the art of active citizenship in the digital era. And that last point is really important to me, that we need to cultivate our own civic intelligence and our own civic imagination. Because if we believe that the future is in cities, and if we believe that we have any hope of innovating to solve some of these big challenges, then we can and we must be more than passive consumers of technologies and cities. Thank you. Okay.
All right, next up we have
Thanks.
Hi, Bianca. Bianca is a senior fellow with Center for International Governance and Innovation and co-founder of Tech Reset Canada. As a planner, Bianca, I thought I know a lot about definitions and policies, and I started talking to her and I realized I need to go back to school for things. Please take it off.
Thank you so much. Let me get this in here. Good. Hello. I'm Bianca. It's really nice to be here today. Thank you for having me. I'm going to start off with a couple things. First, I'm going to say that I really enjoy chances like this to think out loud with you. So this is a bit messy. It's going to get a bit dark, but it'll get light again. I'd like to also say that it's hard right now for me on some days to do this work thinking about technology in cities when the world is literally on fire. And there's an urgency to some of the issues that we're looking at, in the environment. The world is also on fire politically. It is getting very ugly right now out there. And so I take both this time and our time together really seriously, and I also want to let you know that if you have anything else you need to do with your time right now, please feel free at any point to get up and leave. I won't be offended. I know we've all got stuff going on, so I just want you to know that I won't chase you down and ask you why you left. But I really think that we're all doing very important work in our lives, and I just think there's an equity that we should all have for each other in how we spend our time together. So before I get into the few little things I'd like to share with you, I'd also like to say that as sort of ongoing work in reconciliation, I have a little story to share. I don't know about the land here. That'll be part of my homework when I go home. Ideally would have known. But I do work in policy and data policy and technology. I've got a few different parts to my background that I'll tell you about, but I wrote a paper in the last year talking about how we should be managing our data. Data is a big topic right now in cities and urban planning and everything else. And part of the paper talked about how we could manage our collective data. I think a lot of us think about our individual data. A lot of our laws are set up that privacy is an individual thing. But what we have in Canada as of 1998, it's something called the First Nations Information Governance Center. And so in Canada, we have over 20 years of history of one group of people, of First Nations people, who have decided to take ownership and control of their data and to use it, in a way that supported their communities and their lives. And as I was doing this research, I included a little piece of that in my paper. And then when I was almost done my paper, I looked at it and I said, if this was about China, I wouldn't put a paragraph in and just keep going. And I think in this sort of understanding and spirit of nation-to-nation thinking and learning, I took it out of my paper because I wasn't sure it was my piece to tell, nor did I think I understood it well enough to do so. So I'm just sharing that with all of you because I think it's really, really critical that as we think about building our cities and sharing knowledge and culture and customs, if we're really serious about reconciliation, we have to interrogate everything we're doing right now, including how we're building our cities. So I'm not sure if I did the right thing with that or not, but I'm still trying to sort of adapt and learn how we use different types of knowledge and information in our work. So it's great that I get to share a few things with you after Matthew spoke, because I'm here from Toronto, and I am going to share with you sort of a resident perspective on a city building project, and one that I've been doing some advocacy around. Has anybody here heard of the Sidewalk Labs project that's happening in Toronto? Has anybody not heard of the Sidewalk Labs project that's happening in Toronto? A few hands, okay. Very, very quick backstory. It's nice that Cogswell's 11 acres. In Toronto, there's a 12-acre piece of land called Quayside. It's part of Toronto's Eastern Waterfront. And Sidewalk Labs, which is a sister company to Google, is spending $50 million US to make a plan for a smart neighborhood on this plot of land called Quayside. Just a plan. $50 million is going into making a plan. No land is changing hands. And I have been living that process for the last year. So I just want to share a few thoughts about that and sort of see how they might be helpful in both what's going on here and more generally. The first thing, so I've got five things to share from that. The first thing is something that Matthew touched on. It's perfect segue to this work, is that there's a narrative right now. There's this economic development narrative going on in cities, which is that we're going to do innovation and we're going to grow by having technology companies here, and that's going to be the way out of our slow growth in cities. That narrative in Toronto and in Canada for this project has completely taken over what's going to even happen with this project. So there are these two narratives going on. One of them is, let's do smart city stuff because it's great for jobs and great for the economy. The narrative that I'm paying attention to is, what does it mean for the people who live in the city? And I just want to share that narrative has not been the political attention. This has not been what anybody's paying attention to, is what does this mean for people who live here? The entire narrative has been, this is going to be amazing for the city. Because what? I'm not sure. So this story, the sort of backup story to this is that I've been spending a year working with people thinking about how do we set up, resident advocacy and activism to manage this project. Because we don't come together as technologists and urbanists. There is no such resident group. So we've been trying to start building that out. And so as we were sort of working on how to respond to some of this, I learned a really kind of sad lesson, which was that, I was coming forward with data, information, and some ways to try to engage politically. And I realized that the mayor and the prime minister both just thought this was really cool. Okay, right? All right, so this bit high school-ish, not sure what we're doing. And I learned a new word called lobbynomics. And this is also really interesting. This is where numbers start appearing, then they appear in the press, and then they're said in the House of Commons. Job numbers, wealth generation numbers that if you were to try to go back and figure out where they came from, you'd have a really hard time. So just beware of that thing. I'm still figuring out what we're going to do about it, but it's a thing. The second thing that's happened through this project is what I'm calling a significant blurring of the line between the market and the state. Is that you've got a corporation who, if you didn't know any differently, was talking like they were the government. I was at the first meeting for this project, and you had two CEOs, both American, by the way, which is interesting too. The head of Waterfront Toronto, which is a tripartite public corporation, which is tasked with developing the waterfront, and the CEO of Sidewalk Labs. And they were talking about increasing affordability, sustainability, building resilient cities. And honestly, if you were sitting in the audience, you would have thought for sure that they were elected officials, but they're not. This is extremely confusing for a resident. So that's a thing that I think we have to think about. Where I saw this, has anybody been watching the Facebook, the testimony in the Senate with the Cambridge Analytica scandal? Did anybody watch any of that? A little bit? Okay, so just the quick anecdote there, which I think carries over to this problem, is that, Senator Al Franken, I always want to imitate him, but I'm not going to do that. I kind of am going to do it. So he was like, why? How did you not know they were not buying ads? They were in rubles. It was coming from Russia. And it's kind of like one of these okay. And everybody on the internet, as I'm watching, they were like, yeah, get him, Al. Yeah, get Facebook. And I remember sitting at home and I was going, ooh boy, Facebook's not in charge of elections, Senator. That's your job. Right? Is that right? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And so that was one of those ooh, it's getting a bit weird. So that sort of carries over into this city government situation as well, where this blurring is happening, and I think we're having everybody kind of forgetting what their job is, which is terrifying to me. The third thing that I've seen through this project, it's really interesting to listen to urban planners talk, because we have a long history of private sector urban planning firms doing wonderful work with governments. Some of the people who spoke today are exactly that. What you have when you bring technology companies into a mix is you have a different power dynamic happening. You have urban planners that work in the private sector, and you have urban planners that work at the city. When they meet and they work on stuff together, there's a level playing field. When you have computer scientists that work on machine learning at Google, and you have the city's CIO, they're not on the same level, not because they're not both smart, but because we're talking about a different type of industry and a different type of application. So this is also getting a bit strange in how these interactions are going down and what equity and level playing field looks like, that you would have vendors who are now influencing policy in ways that I think sometimes bureaucrats might not even be following, which is a huge problem. But it's very difficult to sort of like put a handle on it. What I can say from it kind of goes back to something Matthew mentioned as well. I was in a room with it was provincial, some people who worked in public health, and they were telling me they were so upset. They were telling me that they couldn't get data from between divisions to flag that the opioid crisis was happening. Like they were having such a hard time, even just within government, sharing data to do their job, that they couldn't really do their job properly. And this is kind of some of the problems of the inside versus if you think how much data is being collected and analyzed and used on the outside, right? So there's a discrepancy here about who knows what and where. And when I think about this idea of, knowing that there's stuff in the sewers, that just sets off, like some of that might be good. I think there's also a whole bunch of surveillance and a whole bunch of other stuff that could be emerging, depending on the actor who's accessing data. It's never one story. There's always trade-offs and different ways to use data. The fourth thing that I've learned, John Ralston Saul is someone, he has written a lot about Canada. He said something at an event I was at a couple months ago that really has stuck with me. It's that, I can never say authoritarianism, I just did it. Okay, democracy moves slowly and authoritarianism moves fast. The tech sector moves fast. And I think that's a really profound remark to think about and say that democracy moves slowly and we have to go slow with how we're applying technology to both our operations, the cities, the places we live. Although everybody is trying to tell us that we got to go fast because tech moves fast and this is just the future and you just got to adjust and you just got to deal with it. Here we are. We make tech, humans make tech. We have agency in these things. This is not something that has to run us over. This is something that we can stop and redefine how it works. But that narrative that I talked about at the beginning, that this is the future, people are very, very scared to stand up to the Silicon Valley magic and say, I don't care if I look stupid. I don't like what that is. I might sound like a Luddite, but I actually don't care. I don't think this is a good idea. Building that confidence in residents to be able to challenge some of the things that are coming out from the technology sector is difficult. That's one thing I've been working on for a year. It is hard. People are basically bullied right now, that they're scared to say something about things they don't understand. That's very Silicon Valley intentional. That's not an accident. Politicians are probably the most scared to look stupid if they don't understand something, so they stay quiet. So we have a chill happening now that is extremely dangerous. I said it was going to get dark, right? Are we dark? Okay, so let's turn the corner here onto the fifth thing. Well, first it's going to get a little bit darker. I'm not sure exactly how I said this, but I think it's urban planning and technology is like a hellscape marriage of elitism, privilege, racism, institutional, every problem that exists in one is accelerated by the other. And so I think right now it might feel comfortable or happy to be like, well, we don't need too much technology, we're good with just urban planning. I live in the city of Toronto and I can tell you that the way that urban planning has landed for racialized people in Toronto has been ugly. It is not a thing that people have participated in and seen themselves in the processes. The people who in Toronto generally drive urban planning processes are white and they own land. That's who shows up to meetings. That's who has a voice. That is who City Hall is listening to. That has not led to good urban planning. If you want to talk about really some of the problems in urban planning, we need to be real about those things. Technology accelerates stuff like this. If something's bad, you add technology and you go bad faster. This is what it does. So this is another reason to really put a stake in the ground right now to consider what we're doing when we use any kind of data analysis tools, software, optimization, efficiency, So the final point here, I think the opportunity for us is to reclaim government and to show up and to say to politicians, I want to be part of any kind of planning with technology. I support you slowing down. I support you asking questions. I'm not going to think you're bad or stupid or dumb if you want to get more of an understanding of how this works, because so do I. And I think if we show up, we can start to bring that confidence back. We can also bring a little bit more confidence back to the need for the public service to have a different vision of what technology is and how it could be used in our cities. There's so much opportunity that if the government is in charge of how technology is rolled out and not a vendor, if the city is not being sold to, but if it's instead creating, there's immense amount of opportunity. As a technologist, I want to do that. I want us to know, math and science is not inherently capitalist. We don't have to always be using technology in ways that it is to make money. There's a whole other realm that's available to us. We should be using that as an opportunity. And so that's the kind of stuff that I think we could be building capacity in through education and through other initiatives at our schools. And I hope that that's kind of one of the directions we can go from here. And I hope, as I kind of wrap up, when I hear, these thoughts about Cogswell and that it's 60% done, I spent 5 years running public engagement processes, and I would just caution maybe everybody in Halifax here that if you're having conversations and you might need to walk back some of that, that's okay. This is a time to say, you know what, in a lot of cases, maybe this needs to be left a little more open. That's how you build a bit more a defensible process, is also admitting when maybe something wasn't right. I don't know enough about it to say anything whether the 60% that's done is right or wrong. What I want to say is that the way you frame conversations is incredibly important. And they dictate, what other parts of the future look like based on some of those things that have been predefined. So I just think it sounds like you have this incredible opportunity. There are so few of these, but let's make sure that we're not replicating old urban planning errors, and maybe really, really think, how do we even take opportunities for urban planning as an opportunity for reconciliation, true reconciliation, not just a memento or identification of something in the past, but how do we take some of the other cultures that exist, within the many nations within Canada and apply them to what the future looks like. And I think there's a ton of opportunity there as well. So that's super exciting. So now it's good, right? We're good? Cool.
Thank you very much, Bianca. That was fantastic. Really appreciate that. Final speaker of the day in this session is Charlot. She is an urban sociologist and advisor at STIPO, where Hans is also working at. One of the great things about these conferences is that we also learn so much about other places and what they're up to. One of the things that I learned over the past 2 days hanging out with Charlot was the fact that they have 4 incubators in Amsterdam dedicated to electronic music. So if you don't hear from me in 6 months, find me under my DJ name, DJ K-Rat. That's what I'm at. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. You're more than welcome to join us, Kourosh. First, you're very welcome there. Is this working? Can you hear me? No? Okay. I'll stay here then. Okay. Yeah? Yeah, I'll just keep it. Thanks. So I have the honorable position to be the last speaker of today. I feel that the world has been saved in many ways already today, so I'm not sure if I have anything to add to that. But I do want to say a few things about the process of innovation and how I feel you can sort of foster other civic innovators and artistic innovators to be part of that process. And I think Halifax is in a crucial position to have lots of creatives here, and it's about I think it's only the momentum to start attaching them to the process of placemaking that are happening here already. So I'm very honored to be here. So as said, I'm part of the STIPO team. Hans has been presenting earlier today. So we're an interdisciplinary team for urban development, trying to tap into the financial and organizational mechanisms to create better places and sustainable transformations and newly built areas around Amsterdam and around the Netherlands and the rest of the world. So we do that by focusing much on the human skill principles in urban design. So that's where I want to look at our current innovation districts in the city of Amsterdam, that if you ask me are not really places that I want to be at. Whatever world-leading innovation happens between those four walls, these are not the places that inspire me as an Amsterdammer, and also not places that would inspire you as Haligonians, I suspect. They're simply not places you want to stay, and they may generate jobs and are great for the city's economy and the R&D sector, but they do not add any value to the urban environment and its neighbors. So we really need to think about the kind of cities we are creating with this narrow-minded view of what innovation is, and I think two of the speakers right before me have that same idea of widening up the idea of innovation. Because our understanding of innovation should not be guided by quantities of patents alone. Because once you start adopting a wider definition of innovation, Amsterdam is actually full of places where you see and feel and interact with innovation. So I will take you along a few of the examples that I brought for you today. So this is the Kourosh, which used to be a polluted, derelict brownfield that is now today a creative hub for circular economy and a clean tech playground for an amazing sustainability consultancy called Metabolic. They took old houseboats that were in the water of Amsterdam, and they put them on shore and allowed for artists and creatives to create their studios there. And in the meantime, that landscaping agency, they planted this grass, a type of grass that is actually in the 10 years of this temporary project, rinsing out the pollution from the soil of the brownfield, which is an amazing experiment. And these are actually places that people do want to be at. What is interesting, as I said, a clean tech playground for this consultancy and for the people that are involved in this project, they now get to transport these innovations into a bigger scale project, which is an actual floating neighborhood, one of the first self-sufficient floating neighborhoods in Europe that they're now creating. And this is very close to it in the north of Amsterdam, one of the warehouses that used to be a ship wharf that is now an actual art city where artists were able to create their studios in a framework that was actually provided by some of the art funds in the city. And today, MX3D is printing the first metal bridge that will soon to be placed in the notorious red light district of Amsterdam. And this place is surrounded by, for example, this urban beach where you would run into these wonderful creative creatures. She's actually a good friend of mine. And so this is the way to activate the waterfront nowadays in the city of Amsterdam. And in my previous capacity, I had the pleasure to work for and help shape this organization, Pakhuis de Zwijger in Amsterdam, which is a former warehouse on the waterfront that has been refurbished into the platform for the creative industries and social innovation in urban development, where in over 600 events yearly, almost all of them are for free, everybody is involved in talking about the issues of the city of tomorrow. And they're also great placemakers. So this was actually an image of the placemaking week that we organized together with Project for Public Spaces and Stipo and many others in the city. And this takes me to one of the intriguing research projects by Julie Wagner and Bruce Katz on innovation districts. They found that actually by studying different innovation districts around the world, it's no longer those eerie garage boxes in Silicon Valley where the most beautiful innovations emerge, but it's actually the inner city, very connected places where it's a combination of economic assets, physical assets, and most of all networking assets where people are actually, they want to stay and they want to innovate. And in order for people to cross-fertilize and inspire each other, they actually need to meet. And for that, they need places. So this is much of the orgware that Hans earlier had been talking about as well. Like, how do you organize these networks that are a vital part of innovation and the innovation ecosystem happening? And who are the best to be helping to shape those places than placemakers and city makers and co-creators and curators and creatives in the city? And for all of you who now think, oh, you must be in a very, very successful and happy situation in the city of Amsterdam, this must have always been like that. No, it wasn't. So So we had our little spur of modernism in the city of Amsterdam, and in the 1960s we were very close to central parts of the city being demolished to have an intersection and a highway running through the city like this. And I think for people in Halifax this may seem a little bit familiar. Luckily this was prevented by activists, so I think we're very happy throughout the 1970s and 1980s in Amsterdam we had a very strong activist movement preventing a metro being run through the, there is a metro now, but it was supposed to run through the inner core of the city and demolish lots of historic buildings, and this was prevented by activists. For those of you who think we have a great cycling infrastructure, this was a tremendous amount of work, 40 years of first activism, then collaborative governance to actually create this, and this is one of the images of activists in a, I just learned from Bianca, a die-in that is now being repeated over the world. And then these are some of the heritage buildings being prevented from demolishment by activists protecting the heritage with their own lives. This is actually the building that became Pakhuis de Zwijger, so we're very, very thankful for the activists to be protecting it this way. So nowadays there's no question whether the city of Amsterdam, I would say, values the role of creatives and artists in city making. So what this presentation is actually meant to show you is that it's not like only the grassroots initiatives that are coming up from bottom up, but it's actually a collaborative process of city making and a lot of political will to actually make this happen. So this is, I'm just showing a few examples. I don't have time for all of it, but this is one of the policies that is fostering these things from happening, which is the creative hub policy, broedplaatsbeleid. Don't try to pronounce that. But it's a very passionate team of 7 civil servants unlocking real estate, underutilized government buildings, and transform them into creative hubs and artistic spaces for subsidized rents for artists throughout the 15 years it has been existing. And many great innovations came from it. So the 3D printed bridge that I'm showcasing, they started in a creative hub like this. Some of the bigger fashion designers, they started in a hub like this. This is an example of an underutilized shell building. They left it on the waterfront of Amsterdam. And this is now a very applied creative hub for artificial intelligence and robotics, but centered around the urban challenges and how it could be applied. And to show you like this, all of these efforts, they have been paying off because the city of Amsterdam in 2016 has been chosen the capital of innovation of Europe, which was not on the basis of one big scale technological innovation, but actually more on the innovation ecosystem and the way it fosters all of these different stakeholders to work together on urban challenges. And you see many economic boards, including the Amsterdam Economic Board previously, saying that innovation is a derivative of knowledge institutes, big corporates, and the local government working together. And we advocated in Amsterdam with a lot of passionate people that this should actually be a double triple helix and include civic initiatives and societal organizations and housing corporations and local businesses, startups and SMEs to be included in this process, and it then leads to innovations that are much more, because they emerge from the local reality and they emerge from the needs in the city, they are much more adaptive to what we need in our cities and not one size fits all big technological smart city solutions that we tend to see nowadays. So for those of you who want to see this urban innovation ecosystem in Amsterdam in practice, the Capital of Europe award has been transformed in a We Make the City festival that actually includes all these stakeholders in the city. And the second edition will be on in June 2019, so you're all invited to come look at it. And for those of you who know a bit of the role of creatives in city making, that you must be aware of this being a very fragile thing. So you often see that artists and creatives are mostly seen as an instrument in rising real estate prices and fostering the local economy to be successful. So this is actually something with Stipo we're trying to counter, or we're trying to look into those financial mechanisms to be put in place to actually make this into a more sustainable movement. And some of the things that we're trying now is we have an experiment running with the city of Amsterdam that's in tender procedures to compel project developers to designate 20% to 30% of the ground floor spaces. Hans has already advocated for the importance of the eye-level perspective, to keep them affordable for creative functions and artistic innovations to be happening there. And soon we will also launch and experiment with the first Dutch City Makers Fund that will help with access to funding and capacity building in the business model creation for creative and social and sustainable initiatives, because we tend to see that, especially for banks and in terms of risks, it's very difficult for them to finance these kind of small scale, with not so long of a track record kind of initiatives, creatives. So this is really something that we are passionate about to be launching very soon. And of course, like moments like these are very important. So this is also what we are working on with the International City at Eye Level network and our network of public developers, the Recreators, and the recently launched European Placemaking Network that was a direct result of the Global Placemaking Week in Amsterdam. So yeah, if you're willing, become part of these networks, and we hope to exchange some ideas and strategies with you. Because for us, after all, the art of city building is a co-creation. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We'll have a short panel. We have about 10 to 15 minutes. We have time for a few questions. If I can ask all the speakers at this session to join us at the panel. That was really fantastic. What a cross-section of different kind of ways of looking at future cities, and what are the things that we should be watching for, and the things that we should be careful about. It was a little dark, but not too dark. That's okay. I'm going to kick off the panel by asking a question from all of you, and that is about the role of public consultation in the future of our cities. It seems like from a local perspective, at a government level, at the municipal level, there's a lot of time to work on something, but then all of a sudden there's an urgency to get it done. And public consultation becomes a bit of a nuisance. People don't have time to do it anymore. And from a technology perspective, we get in situations like Amazon, that they have to release something, because if they don't take over the market, they will lose. It's winner take all, as you said. So in this environment, how do we go about doing public consultation?
A couple points. I think one of them is for governments to be super, super clear about what's on the table and what's not on the table. I think one of the worst outcomes that happens is you go in and people say a million things, and then they don't know that most of that was wasted time because it was never up for grabs. So I think super, super clear on that. Secondly, you've got to meet with people at least twice. Ideally 3 times, but you've got to meet with them once to get information, and the second time you go back and you tell them, this is what we heard from you, this is what we did and why, this is what we didn't do and why. If you don't do that, you're going to have a problem, because you've become like a bit of a black hole. So that's bad. And I'd say the third thing is about the role of expertise, which I'm struggling with every day, what the role is. But I think one thing I learned a lot in city planning exercises was there are things that urban planners and cities know. There are dictates of growth plans, lots of stuff that is already organized for a good reason. If you don't like that, you've got to go participate in different places. But in urban planning, I think one of the best things I saw was ask people what they want to do in places. Do not ask them how to build the thing. You know, if it's going to be a park, don't ask about what the slide or where to go or whatever. Just say, like, what do you want to do in this space? And then you can have people who really have spent their careers helping make that happen give advice on that. So I think it's like being clear about what the role of the public is, because the public is not in charge of everything. This was a big, big thing to understand, is that that's for good reason. You don't have people who do this 3 times a year plan your city. That would be really bad.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I think what I've been hearing also the last couple of days, people tend to think in public consultation, which is like asking for permission almost if you don't pay attention, rather than from what I've been trying to say, like a co-creation kind of perspective, because it's not always what people say and what people, how they voice their opinions, but also look very closely at what people are already doing and contributing, and allowing for those things to happen, because that is like one step further than only asking for opinions and then having people shut up after they're satisfied opinions.
I totally agree with both of these comments, and I just want to add a couple things, which are firstly to pay attention who's there and who cannot be there. So really making sure that this is a robust representation of the kinds of people who will be affected by the question you're asking. I think it's also important to think about why people are saying the things they say, not only to listen to the things they say. And finally, to think really carefully about the tools, because the last thing people want is a gigantic forum in a gymnasium, or the last thing they want is a flyer that asks them 7 questions, right? I think we need to really be creative when we think about the ways in which we're engaging and doing consultation. So not just what do you want, what do you think, but also let's think through this together. And I think that can be a very subtle difference at times, but it's also an opportunity for creativity.
This is on, it works. There's a lot smarter people than me on this panel that talk about these things. I mean, I think the thing that resonates with me the most about what's been said is it's thinking about who's in the room and who's not in the room. I think that's the hardest. I just put on a hat of just a citizen of other cities I've got a young family, I've got a lot of young family, and there are lots of my peers and they can't participate in anything. And they use everything. And in terms of, in the community, they're using sports facilities, there's a whole dynamic in transit, or they can't use transit because they have kids. They can't use a lot of those things, but then there's a whole other part of people who can't afford things, they can't even get to whatever that consultation is. And the key piece is trying to engage a broader demographic.
And maybe just to wrap on a little bit for some tension is that if the bureaucracy was more empowered, the mechanisms that are there to represent people in terms of affordable housing, in terms of social service provision, in terms of use, you wouldn't have to rely on a lot of people who, when you're poor, it's not an option sometimes to come. So sometimes the people who you want to see there just can't come. And that's why we have to think about our institutional capacity and the representation that the state can be providing. And I think it's getting really dangerous to overdo it on public stuff when we know who can show up, right? So I just don't want to make that too much of an onus now on process people to think they can get everybody in a room when in some cases they just can't. And the mechanism we're supposed to be using is the institution.
Matt?
I don't know how much more I have to contribute to what's been said, because I agree with all of it. If I think about my own experiences and some of the things maybe that we've done around Dow housing, I think it's absolutely right that you are going to have richer projects the more you go out of your way to include more voices in the thinking about that. I think certainly on the one hand you can't just discuss something forever. Things actually need to get done, and on the other hand though, I think that if you're not attentive to who is part of considering where projects are going, if you're too myopic about that, that gets reflected, I think, in the kinds of mistakes that become legacies. So as I said, I've kind of experienced this crazy sort of unowned space, and I feel even with something like Cogswell, it's already sort of set up a little bit as, what's the city going to agree to, and it's sort of a question of permission at that level. But I think that a rich project like that, and it would be the same with things that we've done on Dow, is richer when it's not simply one stakeholder who ultimately has the sort of the final ability to call the shot, but actually there's going to have to be a co-ownership of that outcome, and it's an uncomfortable space to be in if you're a regulator, if you're an investor, if you're a big institution. It's uncomfortable to relinquish that piece of it. But I think if you're attentive to the ways in which that can bring out the best in the rest of the community, it's going to be what animates the thing that you're building. I think that will hopefully drive richer projects than would happen otherwise.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to go back actually to the first speaker of today, Amy Johar, who so brilliantly stressed that you may say that it takes a lot of time, but it may feel like a burden, it may slow down processes, but it's it is in essence like public participation is an investment in capacity building and unlocking all of the great capacities that people have in the city. So I would really be happy to take more time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I also think this kind of has to do with data and technology and this. I think a lot of the time we shouldn't be asking things that we know we should be doing, that politically should be done. Should we be building better spaces for poor people, for racialized communities? Yes. Do we need to go and make that a big discussion? No. Should we politically just be doing that? Yes. Right? So I think we also need to temper this with some of that.
We're now going to open to the floor for a couple of questions. There's one right there.
Hi. I had a question about this concept of future cities, which seems to be a lot of innovation and new things. But I think one of the things I've observed recently is that there's a lot of really great organizations that exist in towns that are volunteer-run organizations that provide really important social benefits that are frequently housed in really low rent areas. When those places get torn down and redeveloped, as they inevitably do, those projects and organizations all kind of get thrown back up into the air and then are on the hunt for cheap rent to continue operating services. And so we have things that probably have the same benefit, easily arguably, as a rec center that aren't being supported, that aren't being operated. You have people, volunteers, putting tons of energy and effort into it. And it's this idea we're having conversations about, 20 to 30% being for artists and these kinds of projects and spaces, but yet these groups exist and are desperately looking for places. So I don't know how that exists, right? This is a new technology, this is stuff that already exists, that's already around, and where is the space for those groups in the future, and how do developers and planners do better at supporting the things that already exist?
I think that's a really good question for Charlot, actually.
Yes, it's an issue you see everywhere around the world. So it's a really important thing to be looking at the mechanisms to foster that kind of spaces to remain in crucial locations in the city. And I think I've shown a few examples of how that can be done. And there's of course many other mechanisms, but it should be on the agenda. It should be something on the horizon we should strive for, and then argue back and see how it should be done. But if you put it on the agenda, and if there's the political will, and if there's the will from stakeholders here in the city to have that, then I believe that the mechanisms will be put in place.
Jesse wants to make a comment there.
Yeah, an observation coming from Ontario to Nova Scotia on that. There's something that happens here that I think is really special, and I think the planners here should be commended for some of this. The concept of community center hasn't been lost in Nova Scotia. Some of it doesn't get applied as well on new spaces, but you have Cole Harbour Place in Cole Harbour. That is a community space where a lot of these organizations can use. There's a dance studio in there, there's a pool, there's a rink, there's a library, there's a bunch of things where the community coalesces around that. There's public space in there. There's space they can just use for a pizza thing for people to come together and talk about something. And it's heavily utilized. And I think there are spaces like that across Halifax and across the province that get built. I don't think they get thought of as much for these type of things, and I think they should be a little bit more. But it is something that Ontario just doesn't have. They were given up and not thought about a long time ago, and I think so if you look at just the differences in the country and those opportunities, those community spaces are very, very important. And what we do, we think about that a lot in terms of how you get that environment where you can get different people to use a space and use an environment, and that is, there are some great examples here that we should maybe think of doing better with.
We're sitting in a library.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Like, this is an incredibly beautiful space. And shout out to our sponsors. No, but
big money to rent this space.
well, my point is, this is a beautiful space, and it's been given a new identity. And I think over the past 10 or 15 years, there's been this crisis of the printed word that caused people to think, okay, what's going to be the future of the library? And people really optimistically created a narrative. And that narrative influenced what this building became. And so if it's a rec center, I think the challenge here is how do we create a new narrative? How do we make the public health effects of a rec center really apparent and to really optimistically engage with that future? So the work is in the doing, obviously, but I think we can be really creative and really joyful about that work.
I just want to, I want to acknowledge this woman's point here is that I'm libraries, yay libraries. Firstly, they're a place you can be without having to spend money, and I think that's a really interesting metric, is where are you allowed to be and not do anything, and not learn, and not have to be working on your resume or somehow doing something to do with labor or production or whatever else, right? Like you can just be there. Because even malls now, the food courts are becoming privatized. Like I've seen people take sandwiches in Toronto food courts and like get kicked out by security, and I'm like, what is going on? Malls are gathering places for old people. Like this is sad. But I just want to acknowledge this woman's point, which is that libraries are expensive to rent. And this is true, and you have to have like a nonprofit status to be able to book a room. I don't know if it's the same here, and that's a problem. So how do you make these free, accessible meeting spaces? Because for political action, that's what people need. And that's like church basements is basically one of the only things. You can still have to pay for those too, but like how do you make it free, you know, to organize and to be a political space? So I think libraries still have room to go to get better there.
If Jane was here, I think we would have asked her to speak to this, but she was telling us about the projects that they're doing in Montreal, and she talked about it briefly today, where they're equipping the community centers to make sure that the non-for-profits can use it at year-round, and make sure that they have a space that they don't have to move once the project is being torn down. But at the same time, those community centers can act for, at the time of crisis, if there's flooding. She was using an example in North Carolina where after the flooding, people were rushing into community centers, but they were not equipped with the technology needed for them to communicate with the outside world, so it wasn't really usable. So I think there is a project that maybe after you're done with your jump-in project, you can take that up. All right, another question, please.
Just quickly a comment on this question. I've spent a few years in Halifax all my life, and there have been 3 libraries in Halifax during that period of time. The one in the North End, I think, set the way, and the torch that they brought forward to help the people in the North End and Rodgers Street was amazing. For many, many years it led social change in Halifax. The Keshen Library, I don't know it firsthand, is extremely well used and by that community. But what strikes me, and I'm in this library a lot, I read a week walk away, it doesn't look like there's a Halifax. There's street people here, and they're there too. They're inside. This is a place where people of all ethnicities and money, etc., they're here. They're on Saturdays. This is a home away from home. I think it's the most exciting thing we've ever done for ourselves. So then the only comment, so it links though, is that the library is a place where people who need to get input and have thoughts, share thoughts, is a good place to go if you want to reach people who are not the same people like me that you know everything. And Olivia, you steered the whistle on the way through this, because I agree with you, democracy is very much a combination of how the big forces work. I mean, it sure is grassroots, but the rest can kill it. And I've so often have led and been involved in exercises that maybe nobody really wanted us to do it, just to do it because you have to do it. So I would suggest this was an excellent conference, and I was here last year and I thought it was excellent. So what can you say after you say excellent? And it was so diverse. I would like to have 7 of these a year.
The good news is that we're working for hopefully over the next several months to have conversations along the way, so that we can continue maybe invite you guys back here to have more conversations. We're hoping to have more than one event throughout the year. I think Jennifer and Tara are going to kill me after this, but one more question and we'll wrap it up. Go ahead.
I'll be quick. I was reading earlier about an article from Hebb about perfectionism and what a goal it is, because I don't think it is. And what I've heard over the course of today is that in the planning process and the public engagement process, you don't want perfectionism. One of the things they were talking about earlier were these sort of pilot projects or tests where they would get data, and thinking about the splash pad. They did it. They monitored who was there. They gathered a lot of data. And as much as Bianca, you've given me new things to be afraid of, I'm wondering if that kind of trial and error and monitoring and evaluation are the kinds of things that we should be striving for both in Cogswell and beyond.
Yes, thank you. Take
Yeah,
that
I mean, I'm so nostalgic for things where you just don't do them if they're not a good idea. Because I'll tell you, when people say they're gonna prototype something, it stays a lot of the time. Like, you gotta watch that. We'll just prototype it, we'll just test it. The vendor's giving us a 60-day free license. Like, you really gotta also take that with, so yes, but that too.
But there's something like an ideal scale for experimentation and some certain skills where you don't want to be too careful about what you do. But I do agree that a city, like we've been talking about it today as well, like the porosity, like the incompleteness of cities, the fact that you can tap into it and feel a sense of ownership to complete it is very important. But I wouldn't say that maybe that also always goes for big infrastructure projects, because they may be a bit too strategic to sort of trial and error. But apart from that, like, please do fail and learn from it and iterate and create space for others to do so.
Yeah, just politicians don't like failing. Right, there you go, lawyers don't either, perfect. But I really think that's important to remember, is that everybody can say, oh, we're just trying that thing, and then the culture right now is that you're not allowed to fail. So we need to let our politicians fail. That has to go all the way up the chain, right?
I think it's important that we be a little bit more willing to try things and allow ourselves to learn. Analysis is great, forecasting and all that sort of stuff is great. I think we can also learn from experience, and it's important, I think, to do that. And I think it's something like the oval, the Amero Oval, which was a bit of an experiment, a temporary experiment, and turned out to be something that was really great. And we were able to do that, and we didn't have to sort of have a big, giant, heavy process and a lot of planning. And I do think that sometimes we just need to be able to try things and create some space for ourselves to do that. And I think important things can come out of doing that.
Thank you very much for that. There are a couple of things that Tara wants to talk about, but thank you very much for attending the session.
Okay, so I won't do a big recap now because I have really good news. This is not the end of the conference. There's still one more session. So it's tonight at the Brewery Market in the courtyard. So it begins at 6 p.m., 1496 Lower Water Street. So I hope everyone will join us there. And that's more, as Kourosh mentioned, more of an open forum where people can dialogue, offer some key learnings, hear further from our presenters, and ask lots of questions. But I think it's more of an intimate opportunity to engage with our amazing presenters and with each other, which is what it's all about. This is an amazing cross-section in this room. It's not just about planners and architects and designers, okay? It's about, everyone with a common interest and a different lens on the issue. So thank you all. Bird's eye view is out. Human scale is in. Okay, that's a big one. And anyway, lots more to discuss, but thank you. We hope to see you at the Brewery Market tonight, but thanks for being here and being such great guests. Cheers.